Hello everyone, this is yet another episode of Career Talks, and today we'll be talking about science and also about life as an entrepreneur, as a budding entrepreneur, especially after leaving academia, how to survive in this complex world of business and how to overcome the daily struggles and thrive. Welcome everyone. Dr. Chris Hartgerink is a meta-researcher with a broad interest in how the systems we operate in affect the decisions we are able to make, shifting the balance of responsibility from the individual to the system that they are in. In 2020, he defended his PhD thesis entitled Contributions Toward Understanding and Building Sustainable Science from Tilburg University. Integrating meta-research, sociology, and economics, he is now building an organization, Liberate Science, that, just as the name suggests, aims to liberate research workers by bringing democracy and equality to academia. At Research Equals, you can submit and mint an identifier not only for research manuscripts, but also for other objects such as figures, text, data, or pieces of code. He has received funding from non-academic sources such as the Mozilla Foundation or the Shuttleworth Foundation for pursuing these projects. Okay, so thank you so much, Chris, for being with us today. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and I'm very curious to hear your story from the beginning and what brought you to the place where you are today.
Thanks, Natalia, also for inviting me, and I hope that for the people watching that there's at least something, some tidbit, some nugget of information that may help people on their journey, because I think that what I have definitely learned is that our own journeys, they develop, and we sort of meet at different moments, and the story really goes in so many directions. And I think for me, a big part of my journey has really been that I grew up in a working class family. I'm a first generation student, and when I came to university, there was always this disconnect with the culture of the university, the culture of what tends to be quite an established class and established interest. So for me, one of the big things was that I really started asking questions like, why are we doing things this way? And at the very beginning of my studies, I felt very excluded because I noticed how different my background was. But then as I progressed, I sort of started seeing it as a superpower, because I wasn't necessarily inculcated with the ideas and I didn't take those for granted, that you had to listen to your PI or what the manager said, that goes. And I would probably be very annoying to them, because I wanted to understand why things happen before I wanted to do them. Even if I didn't agree with the reasoning, I really just wanted to understand. And very often it ended up being, well, because I said so, which I don't respond to all too well. So for me, my journey really revolves around my love of research, and how that love for research doesn't really come to fruition in academia, which is also exactly why I left, and why I now, I founded the organization Liberate Science to sort of try and create a space where that is more feasible to sort of express that love and to practice the research that I want to practice, which is sort of a paradox. I end up, doing less research so I can do more research in the future. But in that sense, I sometimes say that I'm a recovering academic, and in my journey moving away from academia, what really struck me was how much that part of my career has influenced my self-worth, my self-esteem, but also to really recognize the value that I bring with my skills and my knowledge. So very practically speaking, I think one of the questions that I asked myself during my PhD was, how much am I allowed to charge for my skills an hour? Because somebody asked me, hey, can you can you do this work for me? And you say the rate. And I saw this as sort of an exercise thinking, well, what is the rate that I can ask myself? So ultimately, I asked them for 50 an hour. And I was like, oh, that's a lot of money while I was still in academia. And they said, sure. So at that point, I was like, oh, apparently 50 an hour, that's the financial value. At least people aren't their financial value, but to sort of represent the assessment of the self-worth by proxy. And then when I left academia, I did a few consulting jobs, and with Liberate Science, we do this sometimes as well. And it's this question of, well, how much can you charge for specific skills? And by now, the rate is many times those 50 an hour. And I'm amazed how much that has done for my my feelings of self-worth, not necessarily because of the money, but just for the people recognizing the value you bring to them and saying, sure, I'll pay that. I see that value. And in my journey, I think that's something that's struck me a lot, that really resonated with me, was this idea of, well, how does academia affect your self-worth and your assessment? And how do the systems in which you operate create an environment for you to really devalue yourself in that sense, or not lift you up? Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a, maybe a bit of a ramble around a lot of different topics. But in my journey, I think that that is really something that has struck a chord in terms of my personal journey, my personal life, and then also subsequently trying to figure out, well, how to support other people to get to spaces where they feel valued, empowered to do what they're good at, because ultimately that is what we want to do. We want to really, when we spend our energy, when we work, especially in research, we want to do things that have value. Well, if we want to do that, we need to be able to assess our own value, and you create this sort of like you rise the tide so that everybody can, enjoy their work better. But in order to do that, we need resources, energy, time, money to be able to do those things, and academia definitely doesn't provide those. So with Liberate Science, what we're also really trying to do is to sort of repair those components of academia and research in general, which feels a bit like a long ramble to a very specific question. So I'm going to leave it at that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, great story. But I'd like to ask you more about what you're doing today with Liberate Science. So, how this organization, what was the beginning? What was the origin story? What is your character arc, within the organization? And but I know you're doing a great job developing open science. But like I think our viewers will be also interested. This is a growing scene within the academic community. But I would like to ask you more about your projects and plans for this year.
Yeah, that's fun to talk about as well. So for me, I've been working in open science for almost a decade now. And at some point, I think it was 2017, I got the opportunity to work on open science full-time in a fellowship by Mozilla. And that made me really think about it also, well, not just what does my work mean in the larger community, and how does my work relate to the efforts of other people? And it really made me think of, well, it's not just my work, it's the work of a community. Even if, I'm typing the text or writing the code, it doesn't mean that is, just me providing value. It's like a whole chain of events that leads into it. So Liberate Science informally started in that era because I wanted to recognize that the work was not tied to my name specifically, but it was, a collective. So I also didn't want people to just see my name all the time. So that's how Liberate Science started in 2017, first informally, and then I got the opportunity from the Shuttleworth Foundation to incorporate Liberate Science and to really create a business out of it. So, and the idea behind Liberate Science is really about repairing knowledge distribution, and then specifically what we're working on is to repair how researchers publish their work. So this is our core project. We also help people, get up and running in open science, do trainings, do talks like this, or keynote or whatever. But the core is really about building and creating community around an alternative way of publishing, where we say, let's forget about the paper for a moment, that inherent format where you've done all the work and then you announce to the world, this is what I did and this is what came out of it. And we say, well, with Research Equals, our publishing platform, which is open access and open source, researchers share each step of the way so that you can actually see what other people are working on. You can include people's feedback in an ongoing manner instead of just after the fact. And that really is the core of our work, is to change the daily practice of research to be more open, both in terms of are you able to access the work, but also in terms of how do you produce the work. So I think it was, it's only 10 days ago now that we launched the platform Research Equals. We went through a few iterations over the past few years, but the idea sort of kept developing with a varied set of people, and now it's finally in a place that people can publish this way. And now the next step is also really about, well, what do researchers need to make their work more pleasurable, more effective, so that you can really, as I mentioned in the beginning, that you can really focus on what you love doing, and that's the actual research, not the reformatting for publication, not the hassles of sort of trying to figure out, hey, where was that piece of that notebook that I now need from 5 years ago, but that it's more the, oh, here it is, let's publish it, and it's all documented in place.
From what I noticed, now the research teams often move their research-related communication to Slack or Discord, but that's imperfect system. And I myself, I freelance as a researcher still, and I have to say that's also nice, because you can choose the projects you like, the people you want to work with, and take the part of the project that you're best at. So it's pleasure actually, and you can charge 50 plus per hour, which was impossible when I was employed. So actually I love that system. And I was also going to say that it's a myth that you cannot do research outside of academia, because there are so many different organizations where your primary occupation during the working day is research, plus you can also freelance. And if your network and personal brand is strong enough, there will be a line of people wanting to work with you. So you shouldn't be worried going outside of academia that you have to say goodbye to research. I can say for myself it's not true, and it's really enjoyable this way. I enjoy it much more than the times I was in academia. But actually in this project we recently had this issue that because of some miscommunication via Slack, there were just a few manuscripts that two of them had similar name and they were messed, and and we were like, oh, how many manuscripts do we actually have? Turned out we have more manuscripts than we thought. So we thought maybe this is not the perfect way to because we have some apparently additional paper that forked out and no one noticed. I definitely have to check out your new platform. And indeed, I think Slack and Discord are not enough to lead a research project. It has to be something more dedicated to research, and have more features that are, yeah, to organize projects. So I'm bullish on this one. Ontology of value, we help professionals with developing their potential, building value, and navigating towards their dream careers. We offer intensive career orientation courses combining self-discovery with practical information about the job market. We also work on our own educational materials such as books and self-navigation manuals. Our new tool, the Ontology of Value test, will help you discover what your natural way of creating value in the job market is and which working environment fits you best. If you'd like to stay in touch with us and receive monthly updates, please subscribe to the newsletter.
So building on what you say, also this point of, research is changing very rapidly. We're getting many new communication channels, and some of them, are perfectly ephemeral. They're short-lived and for very quick synchronous communication. And that's also perfectly okay. But then there's such a big gap between how we do research nowadays after, it has developed for decades, centuries since the paper was introduced. And there's a gap between how we do research and how we publish it. And trying to bridge that gap is what we're really trying to do with Research Equals, where we say, okay, not only Research Equals, there's many quite good new projects which say, let's change that up a bit. But what we really say is, well, here's what we call a module of research, and you can put in the information that you're producing, whether that's data or that's code or that's text or something else completely. And then you sort of publish that bit. And then when you take the next step, you can link it so okay, the research journey developed as these steps followed each other. And one of the things indeed is also with these manuscript revisions, it's so easy to lose track because you're taking so many steps. And then if you don't document that, and you forget, or, there's a lot of other stuff going on, how are we ever able to tell another researcher, well, this is what we did? So then it becomes, again, this narrative of this is what we think we did. So it definitely feels like there is ample space for innovations there. I do want to come back to one thing you said about you can still do research if you're no longer in academia. It is indeed very weird that that there's often this this link between, you're an academic and that means you're a researcher, but you can still be a researcher if you're no longer an academic. I very much feel the same. The only downside, of course, with this is that, yes, you get to choose the work that you like, but you also get all the insecurity that's attached with it. The university also is very, temporary contracts, etc. And that's problematic in and of itself. But freelancing or becoming your own, becoming an entrepreneur or even micro-entrepreneur, means that you also, yes, you get a lot of freedom, but you also get all the insecurities and the uncertainties of your employment and the reduced, labor rights, etc. So in a utopia, I would much prefer that people can do their research at institutions that provide all that certainty and those rights. Mm-hmm. And that is really something that I would love to work towards also, because I think that, we see this increasing amount of self-reliance in our society, which very much focuses people inward and forgets that we're all interconnected. I think this is something we've seen in the pandemic as well, where we've been taught for decades, you need to make sure you arrange your own pension more and more. You need to make sure that, healthcare that isn't covered by your insurance, you need to arrange that, you need to pay for that. And then when a pandemic comes and says, hey, we now need to do something for the collective, it isn't weird that a lot of people then start saying, but I don't want to. Like, they focus on their own perspective on things and not the interdependency. And I think that's very easy to forget in open science as well, is it's not just about individual behavior, but it's also about the collective behavior. And how do we change that if we're only changing our own practices? So that really requires building up systems and changing systems that provide that space for many more. And that's part of my journey within academia. Was also, I really tried to, for years, to get open access on the policy agenda, to get data sharing on the agenda. And back then, open science wasn't as much of a hot topic. And then people said, yeah, no, that's not my responsibility. That's the responsibility of my boss. And now, as it's becoming more and more popular, it's the same people who were saying no at first who are now at the table arguing for it, which is sort of weird, but I'm glad they're doing it. But for me personally, it was very much I felt like reforming a system that's already there, that's too broken, at least from the perspective of what I was trying to do, that wasn't it for me. So with Liberate Science, really trying to build up a parallel institution and trying to institutionalize those values of openness into an organization, which also comes with its own challenges. It's incredibly difficult to sort of transfer those values into an organization and on a team.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We like, I think both didn't start our initiatives in the most fortunate moment, because it was just before the pandemic, and I know that this is not the best times, and I agree with you. Who don't feel particularly safe and willing to risk and put their time in initiatives they believe in as well, just because they're on the survival mode at the moment. And I feel it's especially last year when this whole monster called inflation came to the mainstream media. People started just feeling this survival instinct even more so than the year before. And now it's economy is quite destabilized. And I know, like, it's kind of affecting me as well. And but there's also some things like I agree with you that it's hard to do research as a freelancer just because of this fear of death, in fact, right? Because fear of being broke is a fear of death of sorts. So I agree with that. That's also why I personally, I'm a fan of basic universal basic income concept. I think that wouldn't break the economy at all. But that's another conversation. So
if I can shortly latch on to what you just said about the economy, also, I think yes, the pandemic and the results of that should certainly have had its effect on the precarity, but at the same time, this is something that was there before as well. This has been in the making for 3-4 decades. So even if the pandemic hadn't happened, this would be an issue. And at the same time, I also want to reflect that, we always talk about inflation as an issue, but inflation is also in a way a gift, because, I don't know about you, but I know that a lot of people are in debt. I'm in debt also. I still have student debt. I'm actively not paying off my student debt right now because inflation sort of gifts me that the debt becomes, the absolute number stays the same, but in purchasing power, it just shrinks. So inflation isn't just something bad. Of course, we have to spend more to get stuff, to buy stuff, but inflation also really helps us to sort of make the debt that we have become less of a burden. So in that sense, there's always both sides in this as well. And so this idea of inflation, definitely, there's also benefits. I think the debt collective, getting all the student debt waived in the US has been a very interesting movement for me, because it also showcases that the burdens of the pandemic, of the economy, they're all unequally distributed, and that really bothers me, because we see the same in academia. It's about who gets to participate. Definitely not everyone.
Yeah, it's, absolutely, it's true about that. Also, actually, there's a spy theory that transportation was deliberately um, made difficult during the pandemic, so that the inflation goes up because it's good for the governments, whose debt is actually devalued, as you said. So there's the whole spy theory around it. That's actually inflation was uh, induced by consciously induced by the governments. Like, I heard a lot of theories about it, but I don't know if
Sounds a
it's
bit
true.
rich to me, but
Yeah,
theories abound.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, anyways, I agree that whoever has that, I also have mortgage, so I have the same kind of situation, and I agree that whoever is in that is actually inflation works on their behalf. Absolutely. But I would like to talk a little bit more about your journey as an entrepreneur. So you are now becoming a head of an organization that might be really impactful in the future. You're a leader now. So my question for you would be, at what stage, at what point in your journey did you get that internal feeling that you can be a leader, that you can pull this project
Uh,
and actually you can make it work? When did you feel this calling, and when did you actually feel that this is this breaking point when you were like, okay, I'm going for it, I will make it?
One of the things that somebody who I dearly trusted told me when I was going through a moment of struggle in that sense, said, nobody's born, a leader, or nobody's born a manager. And I think that very much resonated, because, I never really decided that is what I want to be. It's not that there is a moment or a period where I go like, I want to create, I want to head my own organization. It was more the result of, well, I feel like there's no other place where I can do the work that, and I speak from a position of a lot of privilege, where I can do the work that I want to do. So it was more the result of that than so it was the need to do the work that I wanted to achieve, and less the I want to run an organization that maybe in the future has a certain amount of impact. So in that sense, it actually made me empathize with principal investigators in research labs who sort of end up, after doing their research bits, heading a research lab, and they have zero experience managing. The end result is that I very much, and still do, but very much needed to self-educate about what does it mean to be in such a position. What does it mean if you have a certain amount of power or power dynamic in an organization, even when you don't feel it? Because I think that's one of the lessons I've had, is that yes, when you get into these positions of power, you still feel the same. So you actually do not feel powerful, even so you need to actively reflect on the fact that that is what is happening. And I've certainly also made mistakes about it, and I think that recognizing that is very important. So really choosing to be in a leadership position, no, but also recognizing that that is the impression that it has on people. I don't feel like a leader per se, but also again recognizing that I am definitely no longer as early career as I was, and that does change how people see me, and what impressions that leaves. So I'm not 100% sure whether that answers your question. It was more a result of necessity that I'm now in this role, the necessity to do the work that I at least felt like needed to be done to realize sort of this alternative vision for how research can be, then that I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. So it was more a need than a want, I would argue.
Actually, what you say is what leaders usually say, actually. And like I myself, I can see also that I was thinking sometimes, how do these influencers, how are they not stressed if they have like 100,000 followers or 1 million followers? If you say something on Twitter, like so many people see it, you're a public figure if you have those numbers. And I was like, how are these people not even just stressed by like just barely saying something? I would be just feeling like, under like investigation if so many people look at my every move. And but now when I have to communicate in public space for my company, and I see those numbers, okay, 1,000 followers on LinkedIn, then 2,000, then 3,000, then 4,000, but it's like also appreciating a little bit every day, like it's a few people here, a few people there. It doesn't happen overnight, so like there's like such a slow gradual change that like it just doesn't happen overnight. So you don't really feel that difference. You just grow slowly and your following grows together with it. And at some point, and you're not stressed at any point, because at any point in time it's just a little percentage more than just the day before. So it doesn't really feel like a change. So now I see better why these people can handle all this following and the impact they have, because it's just they were working for it for years and years and years, and at no point in time did they feel like something changed. In fact, so I can imagine.
In a way, I fully agree with that. So it's very gradual, and as a result, people might also not adapt as well because they don't feel that stress. I definitely know quite a bunch of people who have grown to quite large followings and then start saying things like, didn't you think twice about what you just said? This, like, people punching down or whatever, and really thinking about, like, centering what they want to say instead of also thinking about what is the impression they leave. So that, yes, but then the flip side also is that as either a following or the responsibilities grow, it immediately, for me personally at least, and I don't know how this generalizes, but it really forced me to reckon with some of my personal failings. So I very often, in like the story of Liberate Science, for me personally, one of my quote unquote mantras is, I personal growth is required to have organizational growth, because I very quickly hit the barrier of my personal limits within the organization. And that can be with regard to, trying to please everybody. And then subsequently, you get 10 suggestions, but you need to make one choice because you can't take up 3 or 4 options from those 10. So you pick one that you think is the best, and then people whose options you didn't choose, they feel slighted because they feel like you're rejecting their argumentation, which doesn't need to be the case. But how do you reconcile? For me, at least, how did I reconcile that with my attempt to be pleasing towards everyone? So ultimately, that led me to really try and be much more attuned to being okay with those feelings of unease, of saying no, which I think a lot of people recognize that saying no is very difficult, but it's definitely at a different scale when you're trying to run a team or run a project. So yeah, personal growth is really a necessity to grow a project. And so yes, gradual change can be very low stress, but that also requires really active work to make sure that you grow with the responsibilities that you get.
Right. What was your biggest challenge so far as an entrepreneur, ever since you started your activities within Liberate Science. What do you think was the hardest?
So definitely don't pin me on what I say. Like I don't have like a clear rank ordering, but one of the things that does come to mind is that communication is so hard. And it sounds incredibly obvious, but it really is much more complicated than I ever thought it would be. Because as an academic, I'm always trained, as long as you communicate precisely, then you've done your part. But the flip side of that is in a project, in a business, that isn't the case. You can be as precise as you want. If somebody leaves with a different impression of what you've been trying to communicate, even though you've been very precise, but for example, very technical, then you have not met your goal. So the goal is completely different from being as precise as possible to being as effective as possible. And that means that, where many times in the beginning, I remember the Liberate Science website in the very beginning. It was very, trying to provide arguments for why we're convinced about what we're convinced about, to sort of convince the people who read it. Now it's much more a simplified language that has been tried and tested, communicated often, and is much more also an emotional appeal to sort of why care about this, and not necessarily intellectually try to convince people. And in a business, I think this is also something I've struggled with because I would communicate something and then think that's my part, but then somebody else hears that, it lands as something completely differently. They go and do their work, and then they come back a week later, and then it's, but that's not what I asked you to do. But that is how I interpreted it. Like that's how, not interpreted it that puts the fault with them, but that's how it arrived for me. So really, how do you communicate things? Checking whether people understand the way you intended it to, because people will say they understand, but that is not a guarantee that you were effective. So communication is definitely one of the challenges that I've run into.
Right. I'm actually in the process of learning that. I have a friend who is now kind of serving as a sales representative for my company, and I'm such a terrible salesperson. That's exactly why, because I'm a nerd, and and also it's so hard. Also, like when someone gets interested in what I do, I'm always have this first reaction, like, "Oh, just take it, just use it, just take it for free." And like I don't have that natural mode of thinking as a salesperson, and hey, this is an opportunity, like sales opportunity. And I also have to learn, in which situations in what context I can talk to people about what, and when is the opportunity for collaboration, when is the sales opportunity, when is I should teach someone something. Like this, really, there are so many different roles you can play depending on the situation. I'm still learning that. I totally agree. And especially in business when money is also on the table, so it's like part of the communication, not only exchanging information and facts, but also there's this financial component. It's so much harder, and you have to learn how to read people much better. So I can imagine. I'm learning myself. It's really hard.
Yeah, and in that sense, like if there's one tip, if anybody wants to go into a position where they manage people or a group or work in a collective, I can really recommend, if you have the opportunity to chat with a coach or a therapist. I think that's one of the best investments I've made. I didn't get a business consultants. They provide value as well for the business directly. It's like X needs to happen, then X happens. But therapy or coaches, they provide really a much more that bigger frame of understanding, reflection, and I can really recommend that if you're in a position, because it also slows you down a bit, and we get so caught up in the day-to-day. I also get caught up in, you know, trying to launch Research Equals, that all of these other things that also need to happen, they just start piling up. And I really thought my PhD was busy, but now I go like, the PhD was easy compared to what's happening now. Like, so yeah, definitely recommend, and this might sound incredibly counterintuitive to a lot of people, but, you know, do the work for, like, do self work, and that's going to benefit you many times more in your professional life than, you know, just bunkering and trying to get as much tasks off your to-do list. Because ultimately it's not about crossing off to-do lists. It also becomes much more about creating a context for you, for your team, to be effective in their work. Because one of the things that I definitely also learned was that once you become responsible for other people, you're no longer like an individual contributor. You no longer check tasks off the company to-do list, so to speak, but you facilitate other people to do that. So if you create a 10% efficiency increase in your team of 10 people, the impact is going to be much bigger than when you give when you quote unquote give yourself as an individual a 10% efficiency increase, whatever that may mean, right? And it's not all about efficiency in any case, but you really become this multiplicative factor in an organization instead of just an additive factor. And that was quite revelatory to me, and just completely different sense of scale. And it's very difficult to feel that as an individual, because I'm very much somebody who tries to cross stuff off my to-do list, and so checking myself in that much more.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I will just think about it more. It's like I also have people to motivate. I'll ask them today. That's my homework to do. Do I motivate you enough? And do you feel more motivated after talking to me than before? I'll just see what they say. It's like it's absolutely true what you're saying. Do you have any mentors, like some like more role model in business, someone who maybe we might have heard of, some name that is like a role model to you in terms of how to build an organization?
So I think for me, it's sort of like there is no one person, but it's a patchwork of a lot of people in different moments. So for example, I get inspired and get energy when I'm feeling a bit, down in the dumps, from people like Peter Murray Rust, who's in the later stages of a human life, but has the energy of somebody who's just starting out. Then there's people who like Tare Lubani, who runs the GLIA project, who provides nuggets of wisdom in moments when you don't want to hear them, but in such a way that it's exactly what you need to hear in that moment. How frustrating it also sometimes is. So I find it very hard to indicate specific individuals, because it's sort of like looping back to what I said earlier in the conversation. It's such a collective effort, and it's not individuals who inspire. So I could keep going on for like 20 minutes picking out people who come to mind, like Caitlin Thaney, who runs the Invest in Open project, who's who's doing such tremendous work building a team of exceptional people and providing space for people and for the community to really inform the work that they're doing instead of simply, um, doing the work and then communicating it out. So that is really inspiring. And some people who I might mention, they say, we never speak one-on-one. So mentorship also doesn't just happen in one-on-one settings. So yeah, I can definitely keep going if you want. I don't know how many people you want to hear about.
I was just curious what you would say, but I agree. I wouldn't also I'm not like following one particular figure as a role model, but I'm just trying to cherry pick whoever is like I don't fall into this aureola effect that once you're good at something, you're good at everything. So like I always just listen to people for how long, as long as they speak within their like field of expertise, and just don't try to just follow any figure in particular, but just combine information and insights from many sources. So I understand. Coming back to Liberate Science and your new platform, Research Equals, who are you currently looking for?
So my work mainly focuses on like the core of the research community, which ends up always being the early career researchers, as far as I know. So it's really about, for the platform specifically, about early career researchers, trying it out, letting us know. We have a Discord channel. We are available on LinkedIn, on Twitter. We have a lot of channels where you can reach us, and we really want to provide ample opportunity for people to say, hey, I need this, or I would like this. And that would really help me, improve my work, because that's why we're here. I'm a researcher. This is a researcher-led project, and we can make changes. Of course, we're limited by resources, but we can make changes within a much faster time span than if you want to change something in a journal. So we really want to benefit from this and say, let's co-create what Research Equals becomes in the future, how it evolves. So that would be my main pitch. So try it out and let us know if you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback. And also with respect to specifically here in this audience, because people, might be thinking about staying or leaving academia. So also really, there's always this option to connect with me directly if somebody feels like, hey, I'm uncertain about something. Could I chat to you in private for a bit? I'm also always happy to provide support in that way. And I especially want to call out people who don't have the resources to get any support in a more formal manner. So especially people from traditionally marginalized communities to reach out, so that I can provide support behind the scenes, because that's something that's been given to me, and I really want to pay that forward in a consensus manner.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris, for all your insights today, and good luck with your initiatives. I'll link them down below. So please, guys, check it out and contact Chris with any questions you might have. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. Till next time, everyone. Thank you so much for watching.